In part one of our series, we journeyed across the vast, sweeping saga of Greek mythology. From the birth of the cosmos in chaos to the bloody shores of Troy, we chronicled the epic history of the universe, the rise of the Titans, the war for Olympus, and the tragic age of the world's greatest heroes. But a history is more than just a sequence of events. It is shaped by the will of powerful individuals. The grand stage we have built is populated by gods of immense power, complex personalities, and deeply human flaws. Their passions were the seeds of creation, their rivalries the cause of war. Now, in part two, we turn our lens from the grand timeline to the figures who forged it. We will go beyond the narrative to truly meet the pantheon, one god at a time, starting with the king himself. Our journey continues, not forward in time, but deeper into the very heart of divinity. Welcome to part two, a deep dive into the pantheon. Zeus, the king of Olympus. In our grand journey through the timeline of myth, we witnessed the rise of a new king, a god who freed his siblings, overthrew the Titans, defeated monsters, and brought a new, lasting order to the cosmos. But in that sweeping narrative, Zeus was primarily a character of action, a revolutionary and a sovereign. Now we pause. We look closer at the god who sits on the celestial throne. Who is Zeus? Is he the wise sky father, the bringer of rain, the ultimate arbiter of cosmic justice? Or is he a paranoid tyrant, a celestial predator, a philanderer whose rampant lusts bring suffering to countless mortals and goddesses alike? The truth, as with all things in the Greek mind, is that he is all of these things at once. To understand Zeus is to understand the paradox of power itself, the constant struggle between order and chaos, law and desire, responsibility and impulse, all embodied in a single formidable god. Zeus's domain is the sky. It is a fitting realm. From his vantage point, he sees everything that happens on the earth below. The sky is the source of life-giving rain, which he dispenses as a blessing to the fertile earth. But it is also the source of the devastating storm, the terrifying lightning bolt, the physical manifestation of his divine wrath. The Greeks saw this duality every day. The same sky that nurtured their crops could, in an instant, unleash a storm that could flatten them. This was Zeus in his most elemental form, a god of immense creative and destructive potential. His symbols are the thunderbolt, the eagle, and the mighty oak tree. The thunderbolt, forged by the Cyclopes, is more than a weapon. It is the ultimate symbol of his authority. It is divine power made manifest, an instrument of instant judgment from which there is no appeal. The eagle, the king of the birds, soars through his domain, acting as his messenger and a symbol of his far-seeing majesty. And the oak, the strongest and most enduring of trees, was considered his sacred plant, its rustling leaves believed to carry his prophecies. But Zeus is not merely a storm god. He is the divine governor, the enforcer of the fundamental laws that allow civilization to exist. He is Zeus Xenios, the protector of hospitality, that sacred bond of trust between host and guest. To harm a guest, or for a guest to harm a host, was to invite the personal fury of the king of the gods. It was this violation that launched the Trojan War, and it's why the suitors in Odysseus's hall were doomed. He is also Zeus Horkios, the guardian of oaths. Any promise sworn in his name was an unbreakable contract. To break such an oath was to commit perjury against the cosmos itself, a crime he would personally punish with ruthless efficiency. He presides over kingship, law, and justice, ensuring that while the world may be chaotic, there are certain lines that must never be crossed. And yet, for a god who so fiercely punished oath-breakers, Zeus himself was a master of deception. For a god of cosmic order, his personal life was a source of constant, universe-destabilizing chaos. This chaos stemmed from his single greatest weakness, a trait that defined his mythology perhaps more than any other: his insatiable lust. Zeus's list of affairs is staggering. He pursued goddesses, nymphs, and mortal women with a relentless, often terrifying single-mindedness. This was not romance, it was divine conquest. And to achieve his goals, he became the ultimate shapeshifter, a master of the cunning disguise. His transformations are legendary, a testament to his boundless creativity in the pursuit of desire. To the Spartan queen Leda, he came as a beautiful swan, a gentle seduction that resulted in the birth of Helen of Troy. To the Princess Europa, he appeared as a magnificent white bull, so tame and majestic that she climbed upon his back, only for him to charge into the sea and carry her away to the island of Crete. To the imprisoned Danae, he became a shower of golden rain, impregnating her with the hero Perseus. To Antiope, he was a satyr. To Callisto, a follower of Artemis, he took on the form of Artemis herself. To Aegina, he was a flame of fire. Each of these affairs was a new story, a new drama, but they almost always followed a tragic pattern: the seduction, the birth of a heroic or divine child, and then, inevitably, the terrible aftermath. For every one of Zeus's conquests, another being had to suffer the consequences. And that suffering was almost always delivered by his proud, formidable, and eternally jealous wife, Hera. The marriage of Zeus and Hera was the central, unending drama of Mount Olympus. He was the king, but she was the queen, the goddess of marriage itself. Her domain was the one he consistently, flagrantly violated. She could not directly punish her all-powerful husband, so her rage was deflected onto his victims and their children. She sent snakes to the infant Heracles' crib and drove him to murder his own family. She hounded the pregnant Leto across the earth, forbidding any land from giving her refuge to give birth to Apollo and Artemis. She tricked the Theban princess Semele, pregnant with Dionysus, into demanding to see Zeus in his true form, a sight which instantly incinerated her. The constant cycle of Zeus's lust and Hera's vengeance was the engine for countless myths. It was a cosmic soap opera that revealed a core Greek belief that the most powerful forces in the universe, the king and queen of the gods, were locked in a dysfunctional, deeply human-like conflict between male infidelity and female jealousy. Zeus's role as the enforcer of cosmic law stood in stark, hypocritical contrast to the anarchy he unleashed within his own marriage. While his affairs caused chaos, they also served a crucial mythological function. They populated the world with heroes. Perseus, Heracles, Minos of Crete, the divine twins Castor and Pollux, these and many other great figures were the direct result of Zeus's unions with mortal women. It was as if the world of men needed a constant infusion of divine blood to produce the heroes required to tame it, to kill monsters and found civilizations. Zeus's lust, in this sense, was a generative, world-building force. But make no mistake, Zeus was far more than a philanderer. When his authority was challenged, his retribution was swift, absolute, and terrifying. We saw how he punished the Titan Prometheus, chaining him to a rock for eternity for the crime of giving fire to mankind. It was an act of brutal, unending torture, a clear message that defying the king's will had consequences. He punished King Salmoneus, who arrogantly tried to imitate the god by riding his chariot and throwing torches to mimic thunder and lightning. Zeus didn't just strike him down. He obliterated him with a real thunderbolt, erasing him from existence. He punished King Lycaon for testing him by serving him human flesh, transforming the wicked king into the first werewolf and wiping out his sons. These stories show the darker side of Zeus's rule. He is the ultimate authority, but he is also intensely proud and demands absolute respect. His justice can be cruel. He embodies the terrifying power of the state, a force that maintains order through the threat of overwhelming violence. So who is Zeus? He is a walking contradiction. He is a god of law who is a law unto himself. He is a protector of marriage, who is the greatest adulterer in all of myth. He is a wise ruler who is prone to fits of childish anger and lust. He is the stable center of the cosmos and the greatest source of its drama. In him, the Greeks created a figure that perfectly encapsulated their understanding of power. Power, they knew, was necessary to create order and justice, but they were also deeply suspicious of it. They knew that absolute power could lead to tyranny and corruption. Zeus is the embodiment of that eternal tension. He is the ideal king and the flawed patriarch, the just judge and the capricious tyrant. He is not a simple god, and that is his power. He is not a perfect being to be worshipped without question, but a complex character to be feared, respected, and above all, understood. He is the sky, in all its life-giving beauty and all its terrifying, stormy power. He is the king, and the mythology of the ancient world revolves around his throne. Hades, lord of the underworld, in the modern imagination, his name has become synonymous with evil. He is the villain, the devil, the dark lord ruling over a fiery hell of eternal damnation. This is the image we have inherited, a figure colored by centuries of other mythologies and a fundamental misunderstanding of the Greek worldview. But to the ancient Greeks, he was not the source of evil. He was the embodiment of a terrifying, inescapable, and necessary truth. He is the eldest brother, the unseen one, the god of wealth, the king of a kingdom to which every mortal, hero, and king would one day pay fealty. He is Hades, and his story is not one of malevolence, but of solemn duty, of a lonely king and of the vast, silent kingdom that is the final destination for all. To understand him, we must first strip away the fiction and journey into the gloom of the Greek underworld. When the cosmos was divided after the great titanomachi, the three sons of Cronus drew lots for their domains. Zeus won the sky, Poseidon the sea, and Hades, the eldest, received the third portion of the universe, everything beneath the earth. It was not a punishment or a consolation prize. It was one of the three foundational pillars of creation. While his brothers ruled the realms of life and change, Hades became the master of the silent, unchanging, and eternal realm of the dead. His very name, Hades, was rarely spoken aloud by mortals, who feared that to name him was to attract his attention. They referred to him by his many epithets or titles. He was Polydegmon, the receiver of many, for his kingdom would eventually house all mortals. But his most telling and important title was Plotin, the wealthy one. This name, from which we derive words like plutocracy, had a dual meaning. He was wealthy in souls, the king of a countless population, but he was also literally the god of wealth. All the precious metals, gold, silver, and all the priceless gems that are mined from the dark places of the earth belonged to him. He was the god of the hidden riches of the world, a concept that ties death and wealth together. Agricultural wealth, too, came from seeds that germinated in the dark soil of his domain before reaching the light. He was not a god of destruction, but of the hidden potential and the final accumulated value of the earth. Unlike his tempestuous brothers, Hades was defined by his stability and his solemnity. He almost never left his kingdom. While Zeus and Poseidon constantly meddled in the affairs of mortals, siring children and starting wars, Hades remained aloof, a remote and imposing figure bound to his duty. His character was like his realm, grim, vast, unyielding, and inescapable. He was not a tempter of souls or a torturer of the wicked. The punishment of sinners was handled by other primal forces, like the Furies. Hades was simply the warden, the king, the host. His job was to ensure that the dead remained dead, and that the fundamental law of the cosmos, the separation of life and death, was never broken. For untold ages, he ruled his dark, silent kingdom alone, while his brothers filled Olympus and the seas with their countless offspring. Hades's halls were empty, save for the fleeting, whispering shades of the dead. He was a king without a queen. This loneliness would eventually drive him to commit the one great, passionate, and violent act for which he is most famous. The story of Hades is inextricably linked to the story of Persephone. She was the daughter of Demeter, the goddess of the harvest, and in her earliest form, she was known as Kore, simply the maiden. She was the personification of spring, a girl of light and life, who spent her days in sunlit meadows with the nymphs, gathering flowers. From his dark throne, Hades saw her, and for the first time, the grim, unmoving heart of the Lord of the Dead was filled with an overwhelming desire. He went to his brother Zeus and asked for her hand in marriage. Zeus, knowing that Demeter would never agree to let her daughter, the very spirit of life, be taken to the land of the dead, neither consented nor refused. He simply gave his tacit approval, a silent nod that sealed Persephone's fate. One day, as Persephone was picking flowers, Gaia, on Zeus's instruction, caused a single, impossibly beautiful narcissus flower to bloom. As the maiden reached out to pluck it, the earth itself split open before her. From the chasm emerged Hades, throned in a chariot of black gold drawn by 4 shadowy horses. Before Persephone could even scream, he seized her, pulled her into the chariot, and descended back into the earth, the chasm closing seamlessly behind them. The only trace of her abduction was a faint echo of her cry, heard by her mother. Demeter's grief was a cosmic force. She searched for her daughter for 9 days and 9 nights, carrying torches, her sorrow so profound that she neglected her divine duties. As the goddess of the harvest mourned, the world began to die. Crops failed, seeds refused to sprout, and a terrible famine fell upon the earth. Humanity was starving, and the gods on Olympus were no longer receiving their sacrifices. Finally, Helios, the all-seeing sun god, told Demeter what had happened. Enraged at the conspiracy of Zeus and Hades, Demeter withdrew from the world completely, declaring that the earth would remain barren until her daughter was returned. Zeus, seeing the world on the brink of annihilation, realized he had to act. He sent his messenger Hermes down into the underworld with a command for Hades. Persephone must be released. By this point, Persephone's initial terror had subsided into a quiet, solemn acceptance. She had become the queen of his dark realm, and Hades, in his own way, treated her with a respect and fidelity his brother Zeus never showed Hera, He was a dutiful, if grim, husband. When Hermes arrived, Hades agreed to obey Zeus's command. But as his queen was preparing to leave, the cunning lord of the dead performed one last subtle act. He offered her a farewell refreshment, a single glistening red pomegranate. Persephone, perhaps out of thirst, perhaps out of a nascent affection for her husband, or perhaps simply unaware of the ancient law, ate a few of the seeds, some say 3, some say 6. At that moment, her fate was sealed. An ancient, unbreakable law of the fates decreed that anyone who consumed food or drink in the underworld was bound to it forever. When Persephone returned to her mother, the reunion was joyous, but brief. When the truth of the pomegranate seeds was revealed, a final compromise had to be struck. For the part of the year corresponding to the seeds she had eaten, Persephone would have to return to the underworld to rule as its queen. For the remaining part of the year, she could return to the world above to be with her mother. And so the seasons were born. When Persephone descends to Hades' side, Demeter mourns, and the world experiences autumn and the cold death of winter. But when she returns to the light, Demeter rejoices, and the earth bursts forth in the life and glory of spring and summer. Persephone herself was transformed. She was no longer just Kore, the maiden. She was now Persephone, the formidable, dual-natured queen of the underworld. A goddess who understood both the light of life and the dark majesty of death. And Hades, the lonely king, now had his queen. Theirs was a union born of violence, yet it became one of the most stable and equal partnerships in the entire pantheon. As the ruler of the dead, Hades was a figure of absolute authority, but his interactions with the living were rare. A few heroes, in their extraordinary quests, dared to venture into his domain, and their stories reveal the different facets of his character. The musician Orpheus, whose wife Eurydice died from a snakebite, journeyed to the underworld, his lyre his only weapon. He played a song so heartbreakingly beautiful that it halted the entire machinery of death. The torments of the damned ceased, Cerberus lay down, and Charon stopped his ferry. Orpheus played before the throne of Hades and Persephone, and his music of love and loss was so powerful that the unmoving god and his queen wept iron tears. In a unique act of divine pity, they agreed to let Eurydice go on one condition. Orpheus must walk ahead and not look back until they were both fully in the sunlight. Tragically, at the very last moment, seized by doubt, Orpheus looked back, and Eurydice was snatched back into the gloom forever. This story, while tragic, shows that Hades was not heartless. He was capable of being moved, but the laws of his realm and the frailties of mortals were absolute. A very different encounter was with the heroes Theseus and his boorish friend Pirithous. After Theseus had lost his wife, Pirithous convinced him to join him on an insane quest, to descend to the underworld and kidnap Persephone to be Pirithous' bride. This was an act of supreme, unforgivable hubris. Hades, aware of their plan, feigned hospitality. He invited the two heroes to sit and feast with him. But the moment they sat down upon the stone chairs, they found they could not get up. They were bound fast to the chairs of forgetfulness, doomed to sit there for eternity, tormented by the Furies. Later, Heracles would come and manage to tear Theseus free, but Pirithous, the mastermind of the sacrilegious plot, was left there forever. This was Hades the Justiciar. His hospitality was a test, and his punishment for those who failed was eternal. To truly understand Hades, one must understand his kingdom. The journey of a mortal soul into his realm was a well-defined and terrifying process. Upon death, the soul, the psyche, a mere shadow of its living self, was guided by Hermes to the edge of the underworld. The first barrier was a river, not one, but 5, encircling the land of the dead. There was Acheron, the river of sorrow; Cocytus, the river of wailing; Phlegethon, the river of fire; Lethe, the river of forgetfulness; and the most famous Styx, the river of unbreakable oaths, by which the gods themselves swore. To cross, a soul had to pay the fare to the grim ferryman Charon. This is why the ancient Greeks buried their dead with a coin in their mouth. Those buried without the proper rites were doomed to wander the banks for 100 years as restless spirits. Once across, the soul faced the guardian of the gates, Cerberus, the monstrous 3-headed hound with a serpent for a tail. Cerberus was a terrifying gatekeeper, but his job was not to keep souls out. It was to ensure they never left. Past Cerberus, the souls would arrive at the great plain of Asphodel. This was the destination for the vast majority of humanity, those who were neither exceptionally good nor exceptionally evil. It was a gray, spectral, and joyless place, where the shades of the dead flitted about like bats, without memory or purpose, squeaking and whispering. This was not a punishment. It was simply an end, a bleak and neutral eternity. But for the truly wicked, and for those who had directly defied the gods, a far worse fate awaited in the deepest pit of the underworld, Tartarus. This was the cosmic prison, as far below the earth as the sky was above it. Here were found the great sinners of myth, locked in eternal, personalized torment. There was King Tantalus, forever standing in a pool of water he could not drink, beneath fruit he could not eat. There was King Sisyphus, forever forced to roll a massive boulder up a hill, only to have it roll back down each time he neared the top. And there was Ixion, bound to a flaming wheel, spinning for all eternity for daring to lust after Hera. Their punishments were not arbitrary. They were poetic reflections of their earthly crimes. Yet there was also a place for the righteous and the heroic, the Elysian Fields or Elysium. This was a paradise, a land of eternal springtime where the great heroes like Achilles and Cadmus enjoyed a blessed afterlife of leisure and games. It was a vision of paradise reserved for a tiny, elite few. At the center of it all was the palace of Hades, where he ruled with Persephone from his ebony throne. Here, the 3 judges of the dead, Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus, would assign each arriving soul to its final destination. Hades did not judge. He simply ruled. So we return to our central question. Who is Hades? He is the quiet brother, the one who took his share of the universe and governed it without complaint or interference. He is the master of the world's greatest, most inevitable bureaucracy. He is not the enemy of life, but its necessary counterpart, the force that gives life meaning by giving it an end. His story is not one of good versus evil, but of the eternal, unyielding order of the cosmos. In a pantheon filled with impulsive, chaotic, and passionately flawed deities, Hades stands apart in his grim consistency. He is the god who keeps his promises, who guards his borders, who maintains his realm. He is the god of finality. While mortals may have feared him, they also understood his role. He was not a monster to be vanquished. He was a king to be respected, and a destination that awaits us all. Hera, Queen of Heaven. She is the queen, not a mere consort, but a goddess of the highest order, born of the same divine lineage as the king himself. Her domain is the bedrock of civilization, the sacred institution of marriage, the family, the legitimacy of children. She is the protector of married women, the celestial matriarch, the empress of the heavens. She is Hera, and her story is perhaps the most profound and enduring tragedy in the entire Olympian pantheon. For the goddess whose entire being was dedicated to the sanctity of the marital bond was, by a cruel twist of fate, trapped in the most notoriously unfaithful marriage in all creation. Her husband was Zeus, a king whose wandering eye and insatiable lusts were as much a part of his nature as the thunderbolts he wielded. And so, the story of Hera is not one of serene majesty, but one of a constant, burning, and spectacular fury. To understand Hera, we must understand the rage of a queen whose kingdom is under perpetual siege from within. Like her brothers, Hera was a child of Cronus and Rhea, swallowed by her father, and later freed by her younger brother, Zeus. She was one of the original six, a goddess of immense power and authority in her own right. Long before she became queen, her preeminence is not just myth, it is history. Archaeologically, some of the oldest and grandest temples in all of Greece were dedicated to her, like the magnificent Heraion of Samos, suggesting a worship that was ancient and profound. Before the rise of the patriarchal Zeus, Hera was a great goddess, a power unto herself. Her marriage to Zeus began, fittingly, with a trick. Zeus desired his beautiful sister, but she repeatedly spurned his advances. Knowing she had a great love for animals, he devised a plan. He transformed himself into a small, shivering cuckoo, caught in a thunderstorm. Hera, taking pity on the distressed little bird, gently held it to her breast to warm it. At that moment, Zeus transformed back into his true form, and taking advantage of her surprise, he seized her. Shamed into the union, she agreed to become his wife, and the heavens celebrated the wedding of the new king and queen of the gods. This story is a crucial key to her character. Their marriage, the supposed bedrock of divine and mortal order, began with an act of deception. It established a pattern of strife that would echo for eternity. Hera, the goddess of the sacred vow, was bound to a husband whose first act towards her was one of deceit. Her domain was clear. As queen, she presided over the heavens. As goddess of marriage, she blessed wedding ceremonies and protected the legal and social contract between husband and wife. An attack on a marriage was an attack on her, and an attack on the fundamental structure of society. This is the source of her legendary wrath. Her jealousy was not merely personal pique. It was a divine fury against the constant public desecration of her sacred office by the one person who should have been its greatest champion. She became the personification of righteous indignation, and her vengeance was a thing of terrible, creative, and relentless beauty. The list of Hera's victims is long and legendary. She rarely dared to confront Zeus directly. His power was absolute. So, she channeled her fury towards the two targets she could reach, his lovers and his illegitimate children. Consider the fate of Leto, a titaness who became pregnant with Zeus's divine twins, Apollo and Artemis. When Hera discovered the affair, she unleashed her full power. She decreed that no land that saw the light of the sun could give Leto a place to rest and give birth. She bound the earth itself by an oath. Pursued by the monstrous serpent Python, a creature sent by Hera, the desperate Leto wandered the earth, enduring agonizing labor pains with no place to hide. Finally, she found a small, barren, floating island named Delos, which was not technically anchored to the earth. and thus not bound by Hera's oath. It was there, clinging to a palm tree, that she finally gave birth to the two great Olympian gods. Hera's wrath was so great, it took an act of cosmic legal maneuvering to overcome it. Or consider the tragic story of Semele, a mortal princess of Thebes, who was also pregnant with a child of Zeus, the future god Dionysus. This time, Hera's revenge was not a physical pursuit, but a masterpiece of psychological warfare. She disguised herself as an old, trusted nurse and befriended the young princess. With feigned concern, she planted a seed of doubt in Semele's mind. "How do you know," the old nurse whispered, "that your lover is truly Zeus? The gods are tricksters. Any man could claim to be the king of the gods. If he truly loves you, ask him to prove it. Ask him to appear before you not in disguise, but in his true divine form." Semele, young and foolishly in love, fell for the trick. She made Zeus swear an unbreakable oath by the river Styx to grant her one wish. After he swore, she made her request to see him in all his glory. Zeus was horrified. He begged her to change her mind, knowing that no mortal could survive the sight. But the oath was sworn. He had no choice. He appeared before her as the Lord of Thunder, a being of pure, incandescent light and energy. The sight instantly incinerated Semele, turning her to ash. Zeus only just managed to snatch the unborn infant from her womb and stitch him into his own thigh to bring him to term. Hera's cunning had led to the complete annihilation of her rival. Her war against the beautiful priestess Io was a showcase of her sheer, grinding relentlessness. To hide his affair, Zeus transformed Io into a beautiful white heifer. But Hera was not fooled. She demanded the cow as a gift, and Zeus, unable to refuse without revealing himself, had to agree. Hera then assigned her most effective servant to guard the cow, Argus Panops, a giant with 100 eyes that never all slept at once. Io was tethered, a prisoner under constant surveillance. Zeus sent Hermes, the master trickster, to free her. Hermes lulled the giant to sleep by telling him endlessly boring stories and playing a reed pipe, and then slew him. To honor her loyal servant, Hera took Argus's 100 eyes and placed them on the tail of her favorite bird, the peacock, where they remain to this day. But she was not done with Io. She sent a vicious gadfly to sting the heifer relentlessly, driving the poor creature mad and forcing her to wander across the entire known world, from Europe into Asia, without a moment's rest. It was a prolonged, continent-spanning torture, a testament to the fact that Hera's vengeance knew no borders and no end. Of all the victims of her hatred, however, one stands above all others. Her war against him was not a single act, but a lifelong, obsessive vendetta. He was the greatest hero of Greece, and she was his greatest nemesis. He was Heracles. Heracles was the son of Zeus and the mortal woman Alcmene. From the moment of his conception, Hera marked him for destruction. She tried to prevent his birth, and when that failed, she sent 2 giant serpents to his crib to kill him in his infancy, a plan the prodigiously strong baby foiled by strangling them. As he grew into a man, a celebrated hero married to the Princess Megara, Hera saw her chance for a more devastating attack. She afflicted him with a sudden, divine madness. In his delusion, he saw his wife and children as monstrous enemies, and he slaughtered them with his own hands. It was this act, born of Hera's curse, that led to his famous 12 labors, a penance for a crime he didn't consciously commit. Throughout his labors, Hera continued to interfere, sending monsters to attack him and making his tasks even more difficult. Her persecution lasted his entire mortal life, but in a strange and telling twist, upon his death and ascension to Olympus as a full god, a reconciliation was finally made. Heracles, now divine, married Hera's own daughter, Hebe, the goddess of youth. The long war was over. In a way, by enduring every torment Hera could devise and still achieving immortality, Heracles had earned his mother-in-law's respect. He was the only one of Zeus's illegitimate children to be fully accepted by the Queen of Heaven. While much of her mythology centers on her role as a vengeful wife, Hera was also a mother. Her children with Zeus included Ares, the god of war, Hebe, the goddess of youth, and Eileithyia, the goddess of childbirth. But her most famous and complex maternal story is that of Hephaestus, the god of the forge. In some versions, she produced Hephaestus by herself, parthenogenetically, in a fit of jealous rage at Zeus for producing Athena from his own head. But the child was born lame and ugly. Disgusted by his imperfection, Hera cast him from the peak of Mount Olympus into the sea below. He was rescued by sea nymphs and grew up to be a master craftsman, the greatest smith the world had ever known. His rejection by his mother is a stark reminder of Hera's obsession with royalty, power, and perfection. It reveals a cruelty that existed within her, independent of Zeus's actions. It shows that her role as a goddess of family was as complex and fraught with contradiction as her role as a goddess of marriage. We must not let the soap opera of her marriage obscure her immense power. When the fate of civilizations was on the line, Hera was a formidable political and military force. Her role in the Trojan War is a prime example. After being scorned by the Trojan prince Paris in the judgment of the Golden Apple, her hatred for the city of Troy became an unshakable driving force of the war. Throughout the Iliad, she is one of the most active deities on the battlefield. She is a divine general for the Achaean side. She plots, she schemes. She seduces her own husband Zeus to distract him at a crucial moment so that the Greeks can gain an advantage. She inspires Greek heroes and directly attacks her own son, Ares, when he sides with the Trojans. Her commitment to the utter destruction of Troy is absolute. She is not a passive, weeping queen. She is a goddess of war in her own right, a terrifying and powerful stateswoman of the heavens. So who is Hera when we look beyond the caricature of the jealous wife? She is the embodiment of structure, law, and the social order of marriage. She represents the institution, the vow, the rules that hold society together. Her eternal conflict with Zeus is the epic clash of two fundamental forces: the force of civilization, order, and social contract versus the force of primal, chaotic, untamable desire. She is a figure of profound tragedy. She possesses immense power, but she is powerless to change the fundamental nature of her husband, the very source of her pain. Her rage, while terrifying and often misplaced onto innocent victims, comes from a place of righteous indignation. She is the eternal protest against infidelity, the divine fury against the breaking of sacred vows. In her, the Greeks created a goddess of incredible psychological depth. She is regal, beautiful, powerful, and terrifying. She is a protector and a persecutor, a mother and a monster, a force for social order and a catalyst for mythological chaos. She is the queen, seated on her golden throne, ever vigilant, ever proud, and a constant, powerful reminder that in the cosmos of the Greeks, power is never absolute, and even the king of the gods must answer to his queen. Athena, the mind of Olympus. In the Olympian family, a pantheon driven by raw emotion, by lust, jealousy, rage, and revelry, one figure stands apart. She is not a creature of passion, but of purpose. She is not defined by her relationships, but by her self-possession. She is the divine strategist, the celestial artisan, the patron saint of the rational mind. She is the goddess of the hard-won victory, the well-made tool, and the well-governed city. To understand her, you must first understand her origin, for her birth is unlike any other in the sacred histories. A singular, violent, and miraculous event that established her from her very first breath as a goddess without peer. She is Athena, and she sprang directly from the mind of the king. Her story begins not with a seduction, but with a prophecy. Before his marriage to Hera, Zeus's first wife was the wise Titaness, Metis, whose name means cunning intelligence. As Metis became pregnant, however, Father Sky and Mother Earth, Uranus, and Gaia delivered a chilling prophecy to Zeus. They told him that Metis would first bear him a daughter of incredible wisdom, but her second child, a son, would be destined to overthrow him, just as Zeus had overthrown Cronus, and Cronus had overthrown Uranus. Zeus, horrified by the prospect of the cycle of patricide continuing, took a drastic and definitive step. He did not swallow the child, as his father had done. He swallowed the mother. In a sweet, deceptive conversation, he tricked Metis into turning herself into a fly, and then he promptly ingested her, absorbing her essence, her supreme cunning and wisdom, directly into his own being. He had neutralized the threat and made intelligence itself a part of his divine nature. But the child, Athena, continued to grow, gestating not in a womb, but inside the skull of the king of the gods. Soon, Zeus was afflicted with a cosmic, skull-splitting headache of unbearable intensity. He roared in agony, his cries shaking the foundations of Olympus. The other gods were powerless to help him. Finally, he ordered Hephaestus, the master smith, to take his largest smithing axe and split his head open. From the cleft in Zeus's immortal skull, a miracle occurred. Athena sprang forth, not as an infant, but as a fully grown woman. She was clad in gleaming bronze armor, a sharp spear in her hand, the formidable shield known as the Aegis on her arm. She let out a terrifying, triumphant battle cry that echoed throughout the heavens and the earth. This birth defines everything about her. She is born of no mother, a motherless maiden, which makes her fiercely independent and loyal only to her father. She is, quite literally, the brainchild of Zeus. She embodies his wisdom and his authority, but with the cunning of her mother Metis. She is not a goddess who represents the forces of nature, but the power of pure, divine intellect. As a warrior, Athena stands in stark and deliberate contrast to her half-brother, Ares. He is the god of war, yes, but he represents its brutal, chaotic, and bloodthirsty aspects. Ares is the scream on the battlefield, the frenzy of slaughter, the unthinking rage of combat. The Greeks, a warlike people, nonetheless disliked and feared him. Athena, on the other hand, is the goddess of strategic warfare. She represents the art and science of battle, the clever tactic, the disciplined formation, the well-planned siege. The war fought not for bloodlust, but for a just cause, the protection of the city, the polis. She is the patron of the general, the admiral, and the military genius. Nowhere is this contrast more vivid than in the pages of Homer's Iliad. During the Trojan War, Ares fights with the Trojans, a force of raw, chaotic power. Athena is the divine champion of the Achaeans, particularly her favorite heroes. In one famous scene, the Greek hero Diomedes, empowered and guided by Athena, actually wounds Ares with a spear, sending the god of war screaming from the battlefield like a spoiled child to complain to Zeus. Later, when the gods themselves join the fray, Athena confronts Ares directly. She calls him a two-faced turncoat, hefts a massive boundary stone, and hurls it at him, knocking him flat. She stands over him and mocks him. The message is clear. Disciplined strategy and righteous purpose will always triumph over mindless brutality. This preference for intellect over brute force informed her choice of mortal champions. While other gods might favor the strongest or the most handsome, Athena was the patron of heroes who were defined by their minds. She was the divine mentor, the whispering voice of good counsel, the provider of the clever tool that would solve the impossible problem. She guided Perseus, not by giving him a stronger sword, but by giving him a reflective shield, the tool of cunning that allowed him to defeat Medusa without looking at her. She provided Bellerophon with the golden bridle, the key to taming the untamable Pegasus. But her greatest and most enduring heroic relationship was with Odysseus of Ithaca. Odysseus was her mortal mirror. He was not the strongest of the Greek heroes, nor the fastest. He was the Polymedes, the man of many wiles, the master strategist who won the Trojan War with his intellect. Throughout his 10-year struggle to return home, Athena was his constant guiding presence. Their relationship was one of mutual admiration and intellectual respect. When Odysseus washed ashore, she appeared to him not as a terrifying goddess, but in disguise as a young shepherd or a trusted old friend to offer him counsel and test his character. She admired his refusal to give up, his ability to endure, and his endless capacity for invention and deception. In the final battle against the suitors in his great hall, she is there, perched on a roof beam in the form of a swallow, deflecting the suitors' arrows away from her champion and his son. She does not fight the battle for him, but she ensures that his skill and courage will win the day. Their partnership is the ideal synthesis of divine wisdom and human ingenuity. Athena's role as a champion of civilization found its greatest expression in her patronage of the city that would bear her name. The story of how Athens became hers is a tale of a contest between two powerful deities and a choice between two different visions of life. When the great city in Attica was first founded, both Athena and her uncle Poseidon laid claim to it. To settle the dispute, a contest was held. The gods decreed that whichever of them gave the city the better gift would become its patron deity. They gathered on the rocky hill of the Acropolis. Poseidon, the mighty god of the sea, went first. He struck the rock with his great trident, and from it sprang a saltwater spring. He offered the city mastery of the sea, the power of a great navy, and the untamed strength of the ocean. It was a gift of immense power, but also of turbulence and brine. Then it was Athena's turn. She did not perform an act of violent power. She quietly knelt and planted something in the ground. From it grew the world's first olive tree. She offered the city a gift of peace and prosperity. The olive would provide food, its oil would provide fuel for lamps and a balm for the skin, and its wood could be used for building. It was a gift of sustenance, wisdom, and civilization. The choice was put to the people, or in some versions, to the gods. The verdict was unanimous. While naval power was valuable, the gift of the olive tree a symbol of peace, stability, and enduring prosperity, was judged to be the greater blessing. Athena became the city's patron, and the city became known as Athens. To this day, the olive branch remains a universal symbol of peace, a testament to Athena's ancient victory. Her temple on the Acropolis, the Parthenon, the temple of the Virgin Goddess, is the most famous architectural legacy of the ancient world, a monument to reason, beauty, and civic pride. Goddess of wisdom, war, and civilization, protector of heroes. It would be easy to see Athena as a purely benevolent figure, a good goddess in a pantheon of flawed deities. But to do so would be to ignore her darker side. Athena also possessed a fearsome pride and a chilling capacity for wrath, especially when her domains are challenged by mortals. The most famous story of her anger is the tale of Arachne, a young mortal woman who was the most gifted weaver in all of Greece. Her skill was so sublime that people whispered she must have been taught by Athena herself. But Arachne was proud. She scoffed at the comparison, boasting that her skill was her own, and that she would gladly challenge the goddess to a contest to prove she was the better weaver. Athena, disguised as an old woman, appeared to Arachne and gently warned her to be humble and to content herself with being the best among mortals. Arachne, full of hubris, dismissed the old woman and repeated her challenge. At that, Athena threw off her disguise and accepted. Their contest began. Athena wove a magnificent tapestry depicting her contest with Poseidon and the majesty of the 12 Olympian gods in all their glory, a clear warning to the foolish mortal. Arachne, in an act of profound defiance, wove an equally beautiful but deeply subversive tapestry. Her work depicted the gods' most shameful moments, Zeus's many adulterous transformations, Poseidon's deceits, Apollo's cruelties. It was a masterpiece of artistry, but also a catalogue of divine scandal, a direct insult to the gods' authority. Athena was forced to admit that Arachne's work was flawless, but she was so enraged by the young woman's impiety and the disrespectful subject matter that she was overcome with a divine fury. She tore Arachne's tapestry to shreds and struck her on the head with her shuttle. Arachne, finally realizing her folly and overcome with shame and terror, tried to hang herself. But Athena, in a final act of cruel creative punishment, refused to let her die. She transformed the hanging woman, her body shrinking, her fingers elongating into spindly legs. She cursed her and all her descendants to hang forever from a thread and to weave for all eternity. Arachne had become the world's first spider. The story is a chilling reminder that wisdom and reason, when offended, can be as merciless as any other divine force. Athena is a goddess of dazzling complexity. She is one of the 3 great virgin goddesses of Olympus, along with Artemis and Hestia. This status is key to her independence. She is never subject to the romantic entanglements, arranged marriages, or passionate whims that control so many other gods. Her devotion is not to a husband or lover, but to her ideals: wisdom, order, and the advancement of civilization. She is the bridge between the divine and the human. Born from the mind of a god, she dedicates herself to the protection and mentorship of mortals. She is the force that seeks to impose rational thought onto a chaotic world. She is the divine spark of genius, the patron of the philosopher, the artist, the general, and the lawgiver. In her, the Greeks created the ultimate personification of the very qualities they most admired in themselves. She is Pallas Athena, warrior, weaver, protector, and the eternal shining mind of Olympus. The divine duality, Apollo and Dionysus. In our exploration of the Olympians, we have met gods of singular, powerful domains: the sky, the sea, the underworld, the institution of marriage. But the Greek genius for understanding human nature was not content to merely assign portfolios. In Two Sons of Zeus, they created a profound psychological portrait of the deepest conflict within us all, the eternal struggle between our rational mind and our untamed heart. They are half-brothers, both sired by the great king of the gods. One is a golden archer, a being of light, harmony, and perfect form. The other is a wandering god of the vine, a bringer of ecstatic madness and primal chaos. They are Apollo and Dionysus, and they are not merely gods of music and wine. They are the two opposing, yet inseparable, forces that govern the human soul. To understand their duality is to understand the Greeks' most sophisticated vision of what it means to be alive. First, let us turn to the golden child of Olympus, Apollo. His very origin story is one of light emerging from persecution. He was the son of Zeus and the Titaness Leto. When the ever-jealous Hera discovered Leto was pregnant, she cursed her, forbidding any land under the sun to grant her shelter to give birth. Pursued by the monstrous Python, Leto wandered the earth in agony until she found the desolate, floating island of Delos. It was there, in a burst of divine light, that Apollo and his twin sister Artemis were born. His first act as a newborn god was one of cosmic ordering. He traveled to the sacred site of Parnassus, hunted down the monstrous Python, a remnant of the old, phonic, chaotic world, and slew it with his silver bow. He claimed the site for himself, establishing it as Delphi, the center of his power and the future navel of the world. From this origin, all of Apollo's domains flow. He is the god of light, often conflated with Helios, the sun itself. He represents clarity, reason, and the intellectual illumination that banishes ignorance and shadow. He is a god of prophecy, the divine voice of the oracle at Delphi. Here, the chaotic, often terrifying future was channeled through his priestess, the Pythia, and transformed into structured, albeit famously ambiguous verse. His was the attempt to impose rational understanding upon the randomness of fate. Inscribed on his temple were the twin pillars of his philosophy, Nothi Soton and Meton Egan. This is the heart of the Apollonian ideal: self-awareness, moderation, discipline, and rational self-control. He is the god of music and poetry, the divine leader of the 9 muses. But his music is not the wild, impassioned drumming of the heart. It is the music of the lyre, an instrument of strings and mathematical harmony. It is the music of form, structure, rhythm, and intellectual beauty. It is the civilizing power of art, the ability to shape raw sound into a pleasing and orderly whole. Even his role as a god of medicine and plague reflects this control. With his arrows, he could bring sudden, clean death and disease. But he also held the power to purify and heal, a power he passed to his son, the great healer Asclepius. He governs the delicate, rational balance of health and sickness in the mortal body. But to see Apollo as purely benevolent is to misunderstand him. The Apollonian drive for order, perfection, and harmony is, in its own way, ruthless and terrifying. Apollo's clarity is a blinding light that tolerates no shadows. His perfection demands the absolute annihilation of anything that falls short. He is a god of boundaries, and the punishment for those who cross them is swift and brutal. Consider the satyr Marsyas, a master of the aloes, a wild, reedy flute. Intoxicated by his own skill, he dared to challenge Apollo and his lyre to a musical contest. After a close competition, Apollo added a new rule that they must play their instruments upside down. A lyre can be played thus, but a flute cannot. Apollo was declared the victor, and for the hubris of a mere half-beast daring to place his wild, emotional music on the same level as the divine harmony of the god, Apollo's punishment was horrific. He had Marsyas strung up from a tree and flayed him alive. This was a chilling message. The raw emotion of the Dionysian flute must submit to the rational structure of the Apollonian lyre, or be destroyed. His cold, detached cruelty was on full display in the tragedy of Niobe, the queen of Thebes. Niobe had 14 beautiful children, and in her pride, she boasted that she was more blessed than the goddess Leto, who had only 2. Leto, enraged, called upon her children. In an act of chilling, coordinated slaughter, Apollo, with his silver bow, shot down all 7 of Niobe's sons. His sister Artemis then killed all 7 of her daughters. Niobe was left childless, her pride shattered, weeping until she was turned to stone. This was Apollonian justice, a perfect mathematical and utterly merciless response to a violation of divine order. Apollo represents the beautiful, rational mind, but also the cold, unfeeling logic that can lead to absolute cruelty in the name of principle. Now, let us turn to his brother, the god who stands in complete opposition to this cold perfection. If Apollo is the god of the self-controlled individual, Dionysus is the god of the ecstatic, boundary-dissolving collective. He is the twice-born, the outsider, the god of chaos, wine, and ritual madness. His birth is the key to his nature. He was the son of Zeus and the mortal princess Semele. After Semele was tricked by Hera into being incinerated by Zeus's divine form, Zeus rescued the fetal Dionysus and, in a strange and miraculous act, stitched the baby into his own thigh, acting as a surrogate mother until he was ready to be born. This second birth makes Dionysus unique. He is the only Olympian with a mortal parent. He is a god who has passed through death before he was even truly born, a bridge between the human and the divine, the living and the dead. Raised in the wilderness by satyrs and nymphs, he is not a god of the city, but of the untamed mountain. His domain is everything that Apollo's is not. He is the god of wine, that magical substance that loosens the tongue, lowers inhibitions, and alters consciousness. He represents intoxication, not as mere drunkenness, but as a spiritual tool for breaking down the rigid barriers of the self. His followers were the Maenads, or Bacchae, primarily women who would answer his call to leave their homes, their weaving and their civic duties, and flee to the mountains. There, in a state of ecstatic frenzy, they would dance to the beat of drums, their minds overwhelmed by the god, experiencing a state of collective, primal unity. They would perform incredible feats, handling snakes, drawing milk and honey from the earth, and in their ultimate state of madness, they would hunt wild animals and tear them apart with their bare hands, eating the flesh raw in a sacred communion known as the sparagmos. This was the ultimate Dionysian experience, the complete obliteration of the rational, civilized self and a return to the raw, violent, and exhilarating chaos of nature. Where Apollo brings order, Dionysus brings disruption. His arrival in a city is always a crisis, a challenge to the established Apollonian rule of law and moderation. The powers that be, the kings and rulers, almost always resist him, fearing the chaos he represents. And his revenge upon those who deny his divinity is even more terrifying than Apollo's. The ultimate story of this conflict is told in Euripides' great tragedy, the Bacchae. Dionysus arrives in his home city of Thebes, but his own cousin, the young king Pentheus, denies his godhood. Pentheus is the ultimate Apollonian man, rigid, logical, obsessed with order and control. He is disgusted by the tales of women running wild in the mountains and vows to imprison this new god and put a stop to his chaotic rituals. Dionysus allows himself to be captured, and in a series of chillingly calm encounters, he doesn't overpower Pentheus with force, but with insidious psychological manipulation. He plays on the king's secret, repressed desires. He slowly drives Pentheus mad with curiosity, convincing the king that the only way to truly understand what the Maenads are doing is to see them for himself. He persuades the horrified but fascinated Pentheus to dress in the clothes of a woman to spy on their rites. Dionysus leads the disguised king to the mountains, and then, in a moment of supreme cruelty, he calls out to his followers, pointing to the figure in the treetop. "This is the man who mocks our rituals," he cries. The Maenads, in their divine frenzy, see not a man, but a wild mountain lion. They swarm the tree, pull it down, and in a horrifying climax of the sparagmos, they tear King Pentheus limb from limb. The leader of the pack, who triumphantly impales his head on her staff, is his own mother, Agave. The story is a terrifying parable about the danger of repression. Pentheus, the man of pure order who denied his own irrational nature, was not just destroyed by it. He was consumed by it, and his end was a spectacle of the most profound chaos imaginable. So, are they eternal enemies? The god of reason versus the god of madness? Not at all. And in this, we find the final, most profound wisdom of the Greeks. They understood that Apollo and Dionysus were not a choice, but a spectrum. They were two essential, inseparable parts of the human condition. The greatest proof of this lies at Delphi, the very heart of the Apollonian world. For 9 months of the year, Apollo's hymns were sung there. But for the 3 months of winter, Apollo would leave his sanctuary. And in his absence, Dionysus and his wild rites would take over the sacred mountain. The center of reason made deliberate, scheduled space for the god of ecstasy. The Greeks knew that a life lived purely by Apollonian principles, all reason, moderation, and control, would be a life without passion, without art, without soul, a sterile and bloodless existence. But a life lived purely in the Dionysian frenzy, all emotion, intoxication, and abandon would be self-destructive, chaotic, and mad. The true Greek ideal was the synthesis of the two. It was to live in the creative tension between them. The greatest art form of the Greeks, tragic theater, is the perfect example. The stories themselves are filled with Dionysian emotions: terror, pity, lust, murder, and madness. But they are presented within the rigid Apollonian structure of meter, verse, and dramatic form. It is a way for society to experience and purge its most chaotic impulses within a safe and ordered container. Apollo and Dionysus are the two faces of a single coin. They are the light and the shadow, the form and the feeling, the mind and the heart. One builds the vessel. The other fills it with wine. One builds the city walls. The other reminds us of the untamed wilderness that lies just beyond them. Their divine duality is not a war to be won, but a delicate, lifelong dance. It is the story of civilization's struggle to contain and understand the wildness within itself, a struggle that is the very essence of being human. We have told the stories of the gods. We have unraveled the tales of their births, their battles, and their complex family dramas. We know their characters, their domains, and their desires. But these myths were never just stories. To the ancient Greeks, they were a fundamental reality, a framework for understanding their existence. The underworld was a real destination. The oracles were a real source of guidance. The gods were a real and present force in their lives. Having met the gods, we now explore their world. In Part 3, we will investigate the places, practices, and beliefs that connected the mythological to the mortal. We will cross the bridge from divine narrative to human reality, to understand not just what the Greeks believed, but how they believed. The next stage of our journey begins now. The Underworld, a guided tour. What happens when the breath leaves the body? When the heart beats its last? When the vibrant, chaotic, sunlit drama of life comes to an end? For millennia, humanity has whispered this question into the darkness. The ancient Greeks, in their relentless quest to understand the cosmos, did not shy away from it. They imagined an answer, crafting a vision of the afterlife so detailed, so complex, and so psychologically profound that it continues to haunt our imagination to this day. This is not a journey to a simple heaven or hell. This is a tour of a vast and ancient kingdom, a realm with its own geography, its own laws, its own silent king, and a place for every soul. So take a breath, for it will be your last in the world of the living. We are about to follow the path of the newly dead on a guided tour of the Greek underworld. The journey begins not with a bang, but with a whisper. At the moment of death, the psyche, the soul, the mind, the personality, separates from the physical body, the soma. This is not a violent reaping, but a gentle separation, often overseen by Thanatos, the quiet god of peaceful death, a winged son of night. The psyche is now a shade, a mere echo of its former self, retaining its appearance but lacking physical substance. It is a fluttering, witless thing, waiting for its guide. But before the journey can truly begin, the living have one final, crucial duty to perform. The proper funeral rites are not merely a tradition, they are a divine necessity. The body must be washed, anointed, and dressed. And most importantly, a single coin, an obol, must be placed in the mouth of the deceased. This small coin is the most important possession a soul will ever have, for it is the payment for passage, the price of entry into the kingdom of the dead. Those souls whose bodies are left unburied or whose families neglect the proper rites are doomed. They become restless ghosts, trapped between worlds, forced to wander the bleak shores of the underworld's great river for 100 years before they are granted entry. This is why Antigone defied a king and sacrificed her own life just to throw a handful of dirt on her brother's corpse. The rites are everything. Once the rites are complete, the guide appears. He is Hermes, the messenger of the gods, in his most solemn role, Psychopompos, the guide of souls. With his golden caduceus staff, he gathers the newly departed souls and leads them on their long, dark journey downwards, towards the edge of the world, to the entrance of the land of Hades. The underworld is a land defined by its rivers. 5 great, dark rivers encircle the realm, each a barrier, each with its own grim purpose. The first and most famous is the river Styx, the river of pure, unbreakable hatred. Its waters are so sacred that the gods themselves swear the most solemn oaths upon it. To break a vow sworn on the Styx is to invite a punishment of a year in a coma, followed by 9 years of exile from the Olympian court. It is the great, inviolable boundary between life and death. But the river the souls must actually cross is the Acheron, the river of woe. Here, on its vast, marshy banks, the shades of the dead cluster, whispering and waiting. It is here that the importance of that single coin becomes terrifyingly clear. For from the mists of the river emerges a skiff, poled by a single, gnarled, and ancient figure. He is Charon, the ferryman of the dead. He is no mere servant. He is a primal, grim deity in his own right. His eyes burn with a feverish light, his beard is matted and filthy, and his temper is as foul as the waters he plies. He demands his payment. The soul gives him the obol from its mouth, and only then is it allowed onto his boat for the slow, silent journey across the sorrowful waters. The air is filled with the wails of the unburied, left behind on the shore. Once across, the journey is not over. The path leads to the great gates of the Underworld, and here stands the kingdom's most famous guardian. Not a man, not a god, but a monster of terrifying proportions. Cerberus, the three-headed hound of Hades. With a mane of writhing snakes and a serpent for a tail, his appearance is the stuff of nightmares. But Cerberus is not a random beast. He is a dutiful guard. The myths say he is friendly and welcoming to those who arrive, fawning on the newcomers. His ferocity is reserved for those who try to leave. His job is to ensure that once a soul enters the land of Hades, it never, ever returns to the light. Past the gates lies the place of judgment. Here, before a great palace, sit 3 figures who determine the eternal fate of every soul. They are Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus. All 3 were once mortal kings, so renowned for their wisdom and justice on earth that they were given the great honor of serving as the judges of the dead for all eternity. They review the life of each arriving shade, the good deeds, the evil ones, the acts of piety and impiety. Based on their verdict, the soul is directed down one of 3 paths to its final eternal home. For the vast, overwhelming majority of humanity, those who are neither great heroes nor great sinners, the common farmer, the merchant, the soldier, the housewife, the path leads to the asphodel meadows. This is not heaven. It is not hell. It is an eternity of gray, featureless mediocrity. It is a vast, dusky plain, covered in pale, ghostly asphodel flowers. Here, the shades of the dead drift aimlessly, without memory, without purpose, like leaves in a gentle wind. When Odysseus visited the underworld, he saw the shade of the great hero Achilles here, and Achilles told him, in one of the most famous lines from the Odyssey, "I would rather be a slave to the poorest farmer on earth than be king over all these dead." The standard Greek afterlife was not a reward. It was a bleak, joyless, and empty continuation, a final fading into nothingness. But for those whose lives were marked by extraordinary wickedness, for those who directly challenged the gods, a different path leads ever downwards. It leads to the great bronze gates of Tartarus, the deepest pit of the underworld, a place as far beneath the earth as the sky is above it. This is the cosmic prison, the place of eternal torment. It is here that the Titans are locked away, but it is also the destination for the most infamous mortal sinners, each locked in a personalized hell that perfectly mirrors their earthly crimes. Here you will find King Sisyphus, a king so clever he managed to cheat death twice, even chaining the god Thanatos himself so that no one on earth could die. For his hubris, For believing his mortal cleverness could outwit the cosmic order, his punishment is one of eternal, meaningless labor. He must forever strain to push a massive boulder up a steep hill. Every time, just as he reaches the very top, the boulder slips from his grasp and rolls all the way back to the bottom, forcing him to begin his pointless task anew forever. Here, too, is King Tantalus, who committed a crime of unimaginable horror. To test the omniscience of the gods, he murdered his own son, Pelops, and served him to them in a stew. The gods, instantly aware of the deception, were horrified. His punishment is one of eternal, unquenchable desire. He stands for all eternity in a pool of cool, clear water, but whenever he bends to drink, the water recedes from his lips. Above his head hang branches laden with luscious fruit, but whenever he reaches for them, the wind blows them just out of his grasp. He is forever tantalized by the relief that is eternally within his sight, but never within his reach. And here are the 49 Danaids, the daughters of King Dionysus, who, on their wedding night, murdered their husbands. Their crime was a perversion of the sacred marital bond. Their punishment is a reflection of their pointless, destructive act. They are condemned for eternity to carry water in leaky jars or sieves and pour it into a cask that can never be filled. Theirs is an endless task of futility. These are not random tortures. They are philosophical punishments, divine feedback loops where the punishment is a perfect, eternal echo of the sin. Tartarus is not chaos. It is a place of terrible, exacting, and inescapable justice. But there is a third path from the seat of judgment, a path reserved for the very few, for the great heroes, for the exceptionally righteous, for those who were blood relatives of the gods. There was a paradise. It was called Elysium, or the Elysian Fields. Elysium was a vision of perfection. The weather was always mild, the breezes always gentle. It was a land of eternal springtime, where heroes spent their days in leisure, composing poetry, engaging in athletics, and feasting at grand banquets. Here resided heroes like Cadmus, Peleus, and Menelaus. In some later versions of the myth, even great warriors like Achilles were allowed to enter Elysium, their eternal reward for a life of glorious struggle. To reach Elysium was the greatest hope a mortal could have, a hope reserved for an infinitesimally small elite. These three realms, the gray plains of Asphodel, the dark pit of Tartarus, and the sunlit fields of Elysium, all exist within the single kingdom ruled from a dark, silent palace at its center. Here, Hades and his formidable queen, Persephone, sit on their thrones, the sovereigns of the dead. Their rule is absolute, their laws unbreakable. What does this complex vision of the afterlife tell us about the ancient Greeks? It shows us a people who did not necessarily believe in a just reward for a good life, as the vast majority were destined for the bleakness of Asphodel, but they absolutely believed in divine punishment for an evil one. It shows a deep preoccupation with order and law. The underworld is not a realm of chaos, but a highly structured bureaucracy. Every soul is processed, judged, and sent to its designated place. And ultimately, it reveals a profound pessimism, a deep-seated belief that life, with all its pains, passions, and struggles, was infinitely preferable to the listless, shadowy existence that came after. The underworld was not a place to aspire to. It was a destination to be respected, to be feared, and to be postponed for as long as humanly possible. It was the great, final truth, the kingdom of the unseen, waiting patiently at the end of every path. Oracles and mysteries, the practice of Greek religion. We have walked with gods and heroes, witnessed the creation of the cosmos, and toured the geography of the afterlife. But in all these stories, we have primarily been observers of the divine drama. Now we ask a different question. How did the average Greek, the farmer, the soldier, the politician, experience this religion? What did they do when they needed guidance in a world governed by fickle, powerful deities? How did they confront the overwhelming terror of death when they knew the bleak meadows of asphodel were the most likely destination? The Greeks were not a people of passive faith. Their religion was active, participatory, and intensely personal. They did not just worship their gods from afar. They sought direct communion. They built two extraordinary institutions for this purpose, two sacred bridges to the divine. One was a public institution, a place to seek knowledge of the future from the God of light. The other was a secret cult, a society that offered its initiates salvation and a blessed afterlife. We journey now to the two most sacred sites in the ancient world, to the Oracle of Delphi and to the mysteries of Eleusis. In the rugged mountains of central Greece lies a place of breathtaking and dizzying beauty. This is Delphi. To the ancient Greeks, this was the absolute center of their world, the Omphalos, the navel of the universe. It was here, after slaying the great Python, that the god Apollo established his most powerful sanctuary. And it was here that he spoke to mortals, offering them glimpses into the tangled threads of fate. For over 1,000 years, the Oracle of Delphi was the most powerful and respected religious institution in the ancient world. Kings and commoners, tyrants and philosophers all made the arduous pilgrimage up these slopes, seeking an answer to a single burning question. The process of consulting the oracle was a long, expensive, and ritualized affair. A pilgrim, known as the Theopropoi, would first have to travel for days and weeks. Upon arrival, they had to purify themselves in the sacred waters of the nearby Castalian spring. Then, they paid a hefty fee and offered a sacrifice at the altar of Apollo. This was typically a goat, but the sacrifice itself was a form of divination. The goat was sprinkled with cold water, and if it shivered and trembled in just the right way, it was a sign that the god was willing to be consulted. If it did not, the pilgrim was sent away, their journey wasted. If the omens were favorable, the petitioner was led into the heart of the temple, the Adyton, a sunken chamber where the magic happened. There, seated upon a great bronze tripod, was the source of the prophecy, the Pythia. She was not a beautiful young priestess. She was an ordinary local woman, often middle-aged and of humble birth, chosen for the role for life. On the days of consultation, she would chew intoxicating laurel leaves and drink the sacred water, preparing herself. She would then descend into the Adyton and take her seat on the tripod, which was situated directly over a chasm in the earth. From this chasm, it was said, a sweet-smelling vapor, the pneuma, would rise, enveloping the Pythia and sending her into a divine trance. In this ecstatic state, she became a vessel for the god himself. She would writhe and thrash, and her voice would change, issuing forth a stream of incoherent cries, ecstatic shouts, and disconnected phrases. This was the raw voice of Apollo. It was the job of the male priests, the prophetai, who stood nearby to interpret these divine ravings. They would translate her words into structured poetry, almost always in dactylic hexameter, the same meter as the epic poems of Homer. But the answers given by the oracle were never straightforward. They were notoriously ambiguous, riddled with double meanings and conditional clauses. The god offered guidance, but he never removed the burden of human interpretation and choice. The most famous example is that of Croesus, the fabulously wealthy king of Lydia. Contemplating a war with the rising power of Persia, he sent messengers to Delphi to ask if he should attack. The Pythia's answer came back: if Croesus crosses the Halys River, a great empire will be destroyed. Overjoyed and certain of victory, Croesus launched his invasion. He was utterly crushed by the Persian army, and his own Lydian empire was destroyed. As he was being led to his execution, he finally understood the oracle's genius. A great empire had indeed been destroyed, his own. The oracle was never wrong. The mortal had simply failed to understand. Centuries later, on the eve of the great Persian invasion of Greece, the terrified Athenians sent for guidance. The oracle's first answer was one of pure terror, telling them to flee to the ends of the earth, for the city was doomed to be destroyed by fire. The desperate Athenians sent back, begging for a more hopeful prophecy. The second answer came. Everything else would fall, but Zeus would grant them a wooden wall to keep them safe. A frantic debate erupted in Athens. What was the wooden wall? Some argued it was the old defensive wall around the Acropolis. But the brilliant statesmen in general, Themistocles, argued for a different interpretation. The wooden wall, he insisted, was the fleet of wooden ships, the Athenian navy. He convinced his countrymen to abandon the city and put their faith in the fleet. The Persians came and burned the empty city of Athens to the ground. But at the great naval battle of Salamis, Themistocles' wooden wall of ships completely destroyed the Persian navy, saving Greece from conquest. The ambiguity of the oracle forced the Athenians to think, to debate, and ultimately to make the wise, courageous choice that saved their civilization. Delphi did not tell you what to do. It forced you to figure out what you ought to do. It was a center not just for prophecy, but for profound political and personal introspection. While Delphi offered public guidance for this life, another great institution offered personal salvation for the next. It was located just outside Athens, in a town called Eleusis. Here, for almost 2,000 years, the most famous and revered secret society of the ancient world held its rites. These were the Eleusinian Mysteries, a cult dedicated to the goddesses Demeter and Persephone. Unlike the exclusive and expensive Delphic oracle, the mysteries were radically inclusive. They were open to any person who could speak Greek and had not committed murder, men and women, rich and poor, slave and free. Their promise was simple, yet profound. For those who became initiates, the terror of death would be vanquished, and a blessed afterlife would be assured. They offered a direct alternative to the bleak, gray eternity of the asphodel meadows. The foundation of the mysteries was the myth of Demeter's search for her abducted daughter. The initiates would, in essence, ritually relive the goddess's journey of sorrow, loss, and eventual joyous reunion. The initiation was a complex, multi-day affair. It began with the lesser mysteries in the spring, a preliminary rite of purification. But the main event was the greater mysteries, held every autumn. It began with a grand procession. Thousands of initiates would gather in Athens and walk the 14-mile journey to Eleusis, along a path known as the Sacred Way. They would dance, sing hymns, and carry torches, reenacting Demeter's desperate, torch-lit search. Upon arrival at the sanctuary in Eleusis, they would enter the great initiation hall, the Telesterion, a place forbidden to all non-initiates. For several days, they would remain inside, cut off from the outside world. What happened inside was the most closely guarded secret of antiquity. For 2 millennia, countless thousands were initiated, yet no one ever broke their sacred vow of silence. We know only what can be pieced together from the commentary of outsiders and the hints of initiates like Plato and Cicero. The secret rites likely consisted of 3 parts. There were the dramana, the things done, a dramatic reenactment of the Persephone myth, where initiates would experience the depths of Demeter's sorrow and the height of her joy. Then there were the decnumena, the things shown. The high priest, the Hierophant, would reveal sacred objects, the Hera, that the initiates would gaze upon. Finally, there were the legomena, the things said. Sacred phrases and commentaries would be chanted in the darkness. It is also widely speculated by scholars that the initiates drank a special barley potion called the kytion, the same drink Demeter drank in the myth. This was likely not an ordinary drink. Many believe it contained a psychoactive substance like the ergot fungus, which would induce powerful, life-altering visions in the participants, breaking down their sense of self and allowing them to feel a direct, ecstatic communion with the goddesses. The climax of the entire experience, the final revelation, was said to be an object of profound simplicity. After days in the darkness, experiencing the depths of sorrow and visionary ecstasy, the Hierophant would appear in a blaze of light, and in total silence he would display an ear of grain. An ear of grain, to an outsider, it means nothing. But to an initiate who had just ritually experienced the cycle of death, loss, and rebirth, it was the ultimate symbol. A seed must fall into the dark earth and die before it can be reborn into the light as sustenance. So too, they believed, must the human soul. The initiate did not learn a secret doctrine. They had a transformative emotional experience. They had walked with the goddess in her sorrow, and so they were promised a share in her joy. They left Eleusis having lost their fear of death, confident that a place in the sunlit fields of Elysium awaited them. Delphi and Eleusis, the 2 pillars of Greek faith. One was public, political, and concerned with navigating the future of this world. The other was secret, personal, and concerned with securing the salvation of the soul in the next. One sought knowledge through the intellect and the interpretation of cryptic words. The other sought wisdom through emotion and a direct, ineffable experience of the divine. Together, they paint a picture of a religion far more complex and personal than a simple collection of myths. They show a people actively grappling with the greatest challenges of human existence, the uncertainty of the future and the finality of death. Through the voice of the oracle and the vision of the mysteries, the Greeks sought to impose order on a chaotic world and find a glimmer of hopeful light in the darkness of their own mortality. They were not just believers. They were eternal seekers. The Roman inheritance, how Greece conquered Rome. In the 2nd century BCE, the burgeoning Roman Republic, with its disciplined legions and ruthless ambition, swept eastward across the Adriatic. It conquered the warring Greek city-states, dismantling their kingdoms and absorbing them into a new, ever-expanding empire. On the battlefield, Greece was utterly defeated. But in the grander battle for culture, for ideas, for the soul of civilization, a strange and remarkable reversal took place. The Roman poet Horace would later write, "Graecia capta ferum victorum cepit." Captive Greece took its savage victor captive. Rome, the conqueror, found itself conquered by the art, philosophy, and most profoundly, the gods of the people it had subjugated. This is the story of the greatest cultural acquisition in history. It is the tale of how the Greek gods put on Roman togas, how their chaotic family drama was given a new imperial purpose, and how, in being transformed, they were assured of their immortality. Before the profound influence of Greece, the religion of the early Romans was a very different thing. Their divine world was populated not by complex, squabbling, human-like deities, but by the numen-abstract divine spirits or forces that govern specific functions. There was Janus, the two-faced god of doorways and beginnings; Terminus, the spirit of boundaries; Consus, the guardian of the stored grain. These were not beings you told stories about. They were forces to be propitiated through precise, contractual rituals. Their chief god, Jupiter, was a powerful sky father, but he lacked Zeus's elaborate backstory of cosmic wars and scandalous affairs. But as Rome's power grew, it came into contact with the vibrant Greek colonies of southern Italy, a region known as Magna Graecia. The Romans encountered a people whose gods were not just abstract forces, but compelling characters at the center of a rich and spectacular narrative tradition. They saw the appeal immediately. These Greek gods had families, they had personalities, they had epic histories. They were far more interesting. And so, the Romans began a long and fascinating process of syncretism, the blending of two religious traditions. They looked at their own gods, looked at the Greek gods, and began to find equivalents, mapping the vibrant Greek myths onto their own more austere divine framework. This was not a simple act of renaming. It was a transformation. The Romans didn't just adopt the Greek gods. They interviewed them for a new job, tailored their resumes, and hired them to serve the ideologies of the Roman state. Zeus, the Greek king of the gods, naturally merged with Rome's own chief deity, Jupiter. As Jupiter Optimus Maximus best and greatest, he was the supreme god of the Roman state, the guardian of its laws and the guarantor of its power. But while he inherited Zeus's thunderbolt and his throne, his character was subtly altered. The Romans, a people who prized dignity and duty, were less interested in the undignified, lustful escapades of Zeus. While the stories were imported, the emphasis changed. Jupiter was portrayed as a more stately, solemn, and authoritative figure, less of a chaotic patriarch and more of a divine emperor. His wife, Hera, merged with the powerful Italian goddess Juno. Juno was a major deity in her own right, a protector of the Roman state and its finances. Our word money comes from her temple of Juno Moneta, where the Roman mint was located. While she took on Hera's role as the goddess of marriage, she was often seen as a more dignified, matronly figure, a divine embodiment of the Roman matron, rather than the perpetually wrathful queen of Greek myth. The most telling and significant transformation was that of Ares, the Greek god of war. To the Greeks, Ares was a figure of fear and dislike, a representation of the bloodlust, chaos, and horror of battle. But to the Romans, a civilization built on conquest, war was a sacred instrument of state policy. And so, Ares was mapped onto their own god of war, Mars, who was one of the most revered and central deities in their pantheon. Mars was not a chaotic butcher. He was the divine father of Rome's legendary founders, Romulus and Remus. He was the divine ancestor of the Roman people themselves. He was a god of disciplined, organized warfare, the kind of war that built roads, established order, and expanded an empire. He was worshipped with utmost seriousness, and his priests, the Salii, performed sacred war dances in his honor. The Campus Martis, the field of Mars, was where the Roman army trained. By transforming the hated Ares into the noble Mars, The Romans elevated war from a brutal necessity to a sacred nation-building duty. The other gods underwent similar, character-altering transformations. Aphrodite, the Greek goddess of raw, often disruptive sexual passion, became Venus. While still the goddess of love and beauty, the Romans emphasized her role as Venus Genetrix, Mother Venus. Julius Caesar and the Julio-Claudian emperors claimed her as their direct ancestor, making her the divine matriarch of Rome's ruling family. Her passion was thus harnessed and given a political dynastic purpose. Athena, the Greek goddess of wisdom and strategic war, became Minerva. While she retained her portfolio over wisdom and handicrafts, her warrior aspect was often downplayed. For the Romans, that was Mars's territory. Minerva was more of a patroness of artisans, teachers, and commerce. Hermes, the trickster messenger, became Mercury, a god whose primary importance was as a patron of merchants and trade, a vital role in a vast commercial empire. And Poseidon became Neptune, a straightforward transition for the god of the sea. Some gods, however, did not translate so easily. Apollo had no clear Roman equivalent. The Romans were so impressed by his portfolio as a god of prophecy, music, and medicine that they imported him lock, stock, and barrel name, and all. He remained Apollo. But the god they had the most trouble with was Dionysus. His Greek rites, the Bacchanalia, involved secret, ecstatic, nighttime gatherings, heavy drinking, and the dissolution of social order. To the deeply conservative and order-obsessed Roman Senate, this was not religion. It was a conspiracy. It was a threat to public morals and state control. In 186 BCE, the Senate issued a decree that violently suppressed the cult of Bacchus, as he was known, executing thousands of his followers. The Roman state could tolerate almost any god, but it could not tolerate the primal, anti-authoritarian chaos that was at the heart of the Dionysian experience. Beyond simply adopting the gods, the Romans adopted their stories and put them to work for the glory of the empire. The greatest example of this is the single most important work of Latin literature, Virgil's Aeneid. Commissioned by the first Roman emperor, Augustus, the Aeneid was a deliberate and brilliant piece of literary engineering. Its purpose was to give Rome a founding myth as grand and as ancient as Greece's Iliad and Odyssey, and to legitimize the new Augustan regime. Virgil took a minor character from the Trojan War, the Trojan prince Aeneas, and transformed him into the father of the Roman people. The epic tells the story of Aeneas's escape from the burning ruins of Troy and his long, divinely guided journey to Italy, where he is destined to establish a new nation. Virgil masterfully co-opts the Greek mythological cycle, making the fall of Troy not an end, but a necessary prequel to the rise of Rome. The hero, Aeneas, is the ideal Roman. He is not motivated by the Greek heroic quest for personal glory, or kleos. His defining virtue is pietas, a uniquely Roman concept signifying a selfless sense of duty to one's family, one's country, and one's gods. We see this embodied in the iconic image of him fleeing Troy, carrying his elderly father on his shoulders and leading his young son by the hand, a man literally burdened by his duty to the past and the future. By making this pious, duty-bound hero the founder of their race, Virgil created a powerful piece of propaganda for a new Roman identity. Another Roman writer, Ovid, took a different approach. His masterpiece, The Metamorphoses, is not a single epic, but a vast, witty, and sprawling collection of over 250 Greek myths, all loosely connected by the theme of transformation. Ovid's work was less about state propaganda and more about preserving the stories themselves in all their brilliant, strange, and often immoral glory. For centuries, especially during the Renaissance, Ovid's Metamorphoses would become the primary sourcebook, the encyclopedia from which future generations would rediscover the lost world of Greek myth. Thus, the transformation was complete. The Romans, through this grand process of cultural appropriation, became the custodians of the Greek legacy. They took the wild, passionate, and often contradictory gods of Olympus and gave them a new sense of Roman order and purpose. They preserved their stories in Latin, the language that would become the bedrock of Western scholarship for over 1,000 years. It was this Romanized version of the myth's Jupiter, not Zeus; Mars, not Ares; Venus, not Aphrodite, that would be copied by medieval monks, rediscovered by Renaissance scholars, and painted by the great masters. Rome's greatest conquest was not a territory or a people. It was a story. And by making that story their own, they ensured that the gods of Greece would not die, but would instead achieve a new and lasting form of immortality, becoming the foundational myths for an entire civilization yet to come. The legacy of myth, the immortal echoes. The Roman Empire, which had once seemed eternal, eventually crumbled. A new faith, Christianity, swept across Europe, and the old gods of Olympus were cast down. Their temples became quarries, their statues were smashed, and their worshippers were converted. Jupiter, Juno, Mars, Venus, they were no longer objects of worship, but relics of a pagan past, often demonized as false idols or devils in disguise. A long silence fell over the sacred groves and ruined sanctuaries. It seemed as if the gods were finally dead, but they were not. They had merely gone into hiding. They slept in the pages of forgotten manuscripts, copied out by monks in cold monasteries who preserved the witty, profane poetry of Ovid. They survived in the East, in the glittering libraries of Constantinople, where the Greek language was never forgotten. And they shone cold and silent in the night sky where the Romans had named the wandering stars for them: Mars, Jupiter, Venus, Mercury, their stories embedded in the very architecture of the heavens. They were not dead. They were dormant, waiting for the world to need them again. And that moment came with a great reawakening. The Renaissance, a rebirth of art, science, and humanism in Europe, fueled by the rediscovery of the lost knowledge of the classical world. As scholars unearthed the old texts, a new generation of artists found themselves utterly captivated by the drama, passion, and beauty of the ancient myths. These stories offered them a language to explore the full range of human experience, especially the human form and its powerful emotions, in a way that was often restricted by the conventions of purely religious art. Suddenly, the gods were reborn in breathtaking color and form. On the canvas of Sandro Botticelli, Venus rises from the sea once more, a perfect, serene vision of divine beauty. In the marble of Gian Lorenzo Bernini, we see the very moment Apollo's hands grasp the nymph Daphne, her fingers sprouting into laurel leaves as she transforms to escape him. A story frozen in stone with breathtaking dynamism. Titian painted the lust of Zeus as he carried away Europa. Rubens captured the violent fury of the heroes. Caravaggio depicted the tragic vanity of Narcissus, staring at his own reflection. For centuries, the myths provided the primary subject matter, alongside Christianity, for the great masters of European art. They were no longer objects of faith, but they had become something just as powerful: the ultimate symbols of human passion, beauty, tragedy, and power. They were the shared visual language of an entire civilization. The gods were reborn in art, but their most profound reincarnation was yet to come. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, as the world was being transformed by industry and science, a new field of inquiry sought to map the most mysterious territory of all, the human mind. And in the depths of our own psychology, the pioneers of this new science found the gods waiting for them. The Viennese doctor Sigmund Freud, seeking to understand the unconscious conflicts within his patients, saw the ancient stories repeating themselves in the dramas of family life. He seized upon the most famous tragedy of all, the tale of the Theban king who unknowingly killed his father and married his mother. And from it, he coined the term that would change psychology forever, the Oedipus complex. With that single phrase, a Greek myth was transformed from an ancient tale into a living, breathing map of our own deepest psychic drives. His contemporary and later rival, Carl Jung, went even further. Jung proposed the idea of a collective unconscious, a reservoir of shared, inherited experiences and images belonging to all of humanity. Within this deep well, he found the archetypes, universal, recurring patterns and figures. The gods of Olympus, he argued, were not just stories. They were powerful personifications of these archetypes. Zeus was the archetypal sky father, the embodiment of law and authority. Demeter was the great mother, a symbol of nurture and loss. Hermes was the trickster, the guide of souls and messenger. Athena was the wise old woman, the personification of wisdom. This was a revolution in thought. The gods were no longer external beings on a mountaintop. They were internal forces within us all. A drama of Mount Olympus was the drama of our own minds. The myths had become a mirror, showing us that our modern struggles with love, power, grief, and identity were the same ones the Greeks had explored thousands of years before. The gods were now inside us. Once you begin to look, you see them everywhere. Their echoes are so deeply embedded in our world that we often fail to even notice them. They are immortal, not just as art or psychology, but as an indelible part of the fabric of our daily lives. Listen to our language. A person in love with their own image is a narcissist. An impossible, tormenting challenge is a tantalizing task. A person's great vulnerability is their Achilles heel. A massive undertaking requires a Herculean effort. A benefactor who brings us knowledge is a Promethean figure. We undertake an odyssey. We fear the Trojan horse. We heed the warning of a Cassandra. Our world is built with their words. Look to the sciences. We launch rockets into space with the Apollo program and plan to return to the moon with the Artemis mission. The largest planet in our solar system is Jupiter. The red planet of war is Mars. The beautiful evening star is Venus. We mine titanium from the Earth and have named elements promethium and niobium, after Niobe, the daughter of Tantalus. The gods are inscribed in our periodic table in our solar system. And of course, look to our entertainment. They are everywhere. They are the superheroes of our modern blockbusters. Wonder Woman is Diana, an Amazon princess from Themyscira. They are the protagonists of blockbuster video games, like God of War and the award-winning Hades. Their stories are retold and reimagined by a new generation of best-selling authors, from Madeline Miller's Circe and the Song of Achilles to Stephen Fry's Mythos. From Disney's Hercules to the Percy Jackson series, the gods are constantly being reborn, reinterpreted, and reintroduced to a new audience. They are more alive today than they have been at any point since the fall of Rome. So we end where we began, with a story that has journeyed through more than 3,000 years of human history. It has been a religion, a history, a political charter, a work of art, a psychological model, and a blockbuster movie. At every stage, it has transformed, adapted, and found a new way to be relevant. The ancient Greeks gave the world many extraordinary gifts: democracy, philosophy, mathematics, theater. But perhaps their most enduring gift was this vast, chaotic, beautiful, and profoundly human collection of stories. They are a shared language that connects us to our past and helps us understand our present. They are the ultimate proof that a good story is the most powerful and immortal thing humanity has ever created. The temples may be ruins and the rituals may be forgotten, but the gods of Olympus survive, for they are not made of stone or gold, but of an infinitely more durable material, the human imagination. And they will live for as long as we continue to tell their tales. And so, our great journey comes to its end. We have traveled from the formless void of chaos to the marble halls of Olympus, from the bloody shores of Troy to the quiet echoes in our modern world. We have told the stories of the gods, the heroes, and the monsters. But in the final accounting, what have we found? We have found that these ancient tales, for all their divine trappings and monstrous beasts, are not truly about them. They are about us. The pride of Hera, the ingenuity of Odysseus, the tragic fate of Oedipus, the impossible labors of Heracles, these are the timeless struggles of the human condition, writ large upon a cosmic canvas. The Greeks, with unparalleled genius, created a mirror, and in it, for 3,000 years, humanity has seen its own reflection. Our capacity for breathtaking love and devastating hatred, our thirst for knowledge and our hunger for power, our mortality and our desperate, heroic search for meaning in a chaotic universe. The gods may no longer be worshipped in temples of stone, but they are immortal. They are immortal because the human heart is their eternal sanctuary. And the myths endure because the story of humanity is a story that is still being told.